The day had started like any other, with the soft glow of early morning light slipping through the small apartment windows and waking the young girl long before the rest of the neighborhood began to stir. She always woke early, not because she wanted to, but because the mornings were the only quiet moments she had before the world grew busy around her. Her mother had already left for her cleaning job at the arts center, leaving behind a warm cup of tea and a short note reminding her to come straight there after school. The girl dressed quickly, tying her worn shoes with the same careful tug she gave them each day. Everything she owned had been used for a long time, but she didn't mind. She had learned to take care of what little she had, and much of it felt special because it had come from her mother's hard work. She packed her simple lunch into a faded bag and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The walk to school was filled with familiar sights: neighbors opening their shops, children running to catch early buses, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery on the corner. But her mind wasn't on any of these things. She was thinking about the arts center as she always did. The building wasn't just a place her mother worked. To her, it was like another world. People walked through its doors with instruments in their hands and stories in their eyes. The halls were filled with music of every kind, drifting like warm air through every room. Even though she didn't belong there, she felt something each time she stepped inside, something she couldn't explain. School passed slowly as it usually did. She listened, took notes, and tried her best to understand her lessons, but she often felt her attention drifting. She wasn't the loud student in class or the one who always raised her hand. She stayed quiet, stayed small, stayed unnoticed. But at lunch, as she sat under the large tree in the courtyard, she imagined sounds, soft notes, simple melodies, the kind she had heard floating through the arts center halls. She tapped them out on her knee, barely audible, but enough to bring a small smile to her face. When the last bell rang, she hurried out of the school gates. Her walk toward the arts center was filled with a new kind of excitement today, though she didn't know why. Perhaps it was just the idea of spending another afternoon in a place that made her feel less invisible. The arts center towered over the street when she reached it, its glass windows reflecting the bright sunlight. She pushed open the heavy front door and paused for a moment, breathing in the familiar mix of polished wood, old books, and warm air. She made her way down the hallway where her mother was usually assigned to clean. Today, though, the hallways were unusually quiet. Most of the artists were in the auditorium, preparing for a large event happening later in the week. Her mother spotted her from a distance and gave her a tired smile. "I'll be a little longer today," she said gently. "Why don't you sit in the lobby? It's warm there." The girl nodded and walked toward the large open area with soft lights and comfortable chairs. She settled into her usual corner seat, but soon her eyes wandered toward the main hall. The grand piano stood there, shining even in the dim afternoon light. It looked so delicate yet strong, like it held secrets in its keys. She had admired it from afar many times but had never gone too close. Her mother always said it was better to stay out of the way, better not to touch things that didn't belong to her. Still, today something felt different. Maybe it was because the hall was so empty. Maybe it was because the sound of footsteps and music was faint in the distance. Or maybe it was just that deep inside her, a question had been waiting far too long. What would it feel like to touch those keys? What would they sound like under her fingers? Would it be as magical as she imagined? She looked around, checking if anyone was nearby. The hall was silent. Even the distant voices of artists practicing seemed softer than usual. She stood up slowly, almost without meaning to, and walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy and light at the same time. Her heart beat faster, not out of fear exactly, but something close to it. When she reached the piano, she stood for a long moment, her hands hanging at her sides. Up close, the instrument looked even more beautiful. The black surface was smooth, reflecting her small face and wide eyes. She lifted her hand, then lowered it again. She wasn't supposed to touch it. She knew that, but still, something inside her insisted. With one deep breath, she placed her fingers lightly on a single key. She didn't press it, not yet. Her hand shook a little, and she wondered if this was a mistake. But just standing there, so close, made her feel a strange sense of belonging. She pressed the key gently. A soft note rang through the empty hall. It echoed lightly, like a secret being spoken for the first time. She froze, startled by how clear and beautiful it sounded. She waited, listening, half expecting someone to come running and scold her. But nothing happened. She pressed the key again, this time holding it a second longer. The sound felt warm. It made her heart flutter in a way she couldn't explain. She pressed another key, then another, creating a tiny line of notes that reminded her of something she had once heard drifting through the hallways. The room felt different now, alive in a way she had never experienced. She didn't know she had closed her eyes until she opened them again. She looked around once more, but still, no one had come. Her fingers hovered over the keys again. A memory stirred, a simple tune she had heard months ago. She didn't know its name or who played it, but it had stayed with her. She tried the first few notes, slowly at first, her finger movements clumsy but filled with curiosity. To her surprise, the melody came easily. It was as if her hands knew what to do even though she had never learned. She played the next line, then the next. The music grew a little louder, fuller, filling the empty hall in a way that made her feel both small and powerful. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like the quiet girl no one noticed. Here, in this moment, she felt seen even though no one was watching. She felt connected to something greater than herself, something beautiful she never knew she could touch. She continued for a few minutes, trying different notes, learning by sound and feeling rather than rules or lessons. She didn't know if what she played was correct. She didn't know if it made sense. But it made her happy. Her mother, still cleaning nearby, paused for a moment when she heard a faint sound drifting through the hall. She assumed it was one of the artists practicing and thought nothing more of it. The girl stopped playing after a while, her hands resting on the keys. She didn't want to walk away, but she felt she had already taken enough of a risk. With one last glance at the piano, she stepped back, feeling her heart still racing. As she returned to her seat in the lobby, she felt different, lighter somehow, as if a door inside her had opened, revealing something she never knew was there. She didn't speak of it to anyone. She simply sat quietly, waiting for her mother to finish, unaware that this small moment was the beginning of something far bigger than she could ever imagine. She had no idea that somewhere deeper inside the arts center, a few artists had paused during their rehearsal, hearing unexpected notes drifting through the air. She didn't know that in the coming days, her life was about to change in ways she never expected. For now, she was just a young girl who had touched a piano for the very first time, and found something she didn't know she was searching for. The next afternoon, the girl returned to the arts center with the same quiet excitement she had felt the day before. She didn't tell her mother about what had happened the previous day, partly because she didn't know how to explain it, and partly because she feared her mother might scold her. Instead, she kept the memory in her mind, replaying the gentle notes she had pressed on the piano and imagining the way they had sounded in the empty hall. School passed in its usual slow rhythm, and she counted the minutes until she could leave. When the bell finally rang, she practically ran through the familiar streets, her bag bouncing against her side. The thought of the piano made her fingers twitch with anticipation. She imagined how it would feel to touch it again, to hear the notes echoing in the hall, soft and full of life. When she arrived at the arts center, her mother waved her toward the lobby as usual, but the girl's eyes immediately scanned the hall. Today it was even quieter than yesterday, the kind of quiet that felt like it was waiting for something to happen. She lingered near the entrance for a moment. Then, with the same hesitant curiosity, she approached the grand piano again. Standing before it, she took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys, just above the smooth surface. She didn't rush. She wanted to feel every note, every sound, as if she were discovering the music for the first time. Slowly, she pressed a single key, and the note rang out clearly, echoing in the hall. She pressed another key, then another, and before she realized it, she was playing a simple melody she remembered from school music lessons. It was nothing complicated, just a short, sweet tune, but it felt alive under her fingertips. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her hands move naturally. She didn't know what she was doing. Not really. She had never had lessons, never learned scales or chords. But somehow, it felt as if her fingers knew the notes themselves, as if the music was already inside her, waiting to come out. Each key she pressed added to the melody, each note vibrating in a way that made her heart feel lighter. A soft breeze from the open window brushed against her face, and she imagined the sound traveling beyond the hall, reaching ears that might listen, even if she didn't know who they were. She was so focused that she didn't notice a shadow move along the far corridor. One by one, a few of the artists practicing for the upcoming showcase had paused when they heard the faint music drifting through the building. They followed the sound, expecting to find one of their colleagues, someone practicing before rehearsal, and were surprised when the notes grew clearer as they neared the hall. As she continued to play, a small smile appeared on her face. The music felt like it was speaking directly to her, sharing something she couldn't quite name. She tried another short line, letting her intuition guide her fingers. The notes blended into a simple harmony, soft and imperfect, yet beautiful in its own way. She didn't stop to think whether it was correct or not. She only knew it sounded right. The artists walking down the hallway slowed, exchanging glances as the music became more distinct. One of them whispered to another, wondering if they were imagining it. But the sound was real, clear, and impossible to ignore. It carried a delicate charm, a natural quality that suggested the person playing had never been taught, but understood the essence of music in a way many trained musicians sometimes struggled to capture. The girl continued, oblivious to the growing audience. She pressed the keys lightly, experimenting with small variations, repeating notes that felt meaningful. Every touch seemed to resonate deeper within her, as if the piano and she were communicating silently. It wasn't about the applause or recognition. It was about discovery, about feeling something extraordinary in an ordinary afternoon. Suddenly, she made a small mistake. She struck a wrong key, and the note rang out sharply in contrast to the smooth melody she had been creating. She gasped and froze, expecting someone to scold her or tell her she had no right to play. But instead, she heard a quiet murmur from behind. Curious, she looked up slowly, and her eyes widened. A group of artists stood in the doorway, watching her intently. Their expressions were a mixture of surprise and admiration. They were not there to correct or instruct. They were simply listening, captivated by the purity of the music coming from such an unexpected source. The girl felt a mixture of embarrassment and awe. She hadn't meant for anyone to hear her. She hadn't even thought about an audience. And yet, here they were, drawn by her accidental notes, the music she had barely begun to understand herself. She tried to speak, but no words came out. She only continued to press the keys, letting the music flow despite her nervousness. She played a few more notes, this time more carefully, trying to match the melody she had imagined in her mind. Each note seemed to echo through the hall, carrying with it a feeling of innocence and wonder. The artist's eyes remained fixed on her, their admiration growing with every passing moment. One of the senior musicians stepped forward slowly, unsure how to address the situation. He didn't interrupt her. He simply watched, fascinated by the natural rhythm of her hands and the intuitive harmony she created. Another whispered to a colleague about the rarity of witnessing such raw, untaught talent. The girl's fingers moved instinctively, forming combinations of notes she had never consciously practiced. Yet they sounded complete, as if the piano itself were guiding her. The girl was unaware that this accidental performance was unlike anything the artists had heard before. They had attended countless rehearsals, listened to professional pianists, and watched young prodigies perform. But there was something in her music that was different. It was unrefined yet perfect in its honesty, naive yet emotionally powerful. The simplicity of her approach, combined with the natural instinct she showed, made the melody resonate with a unique clarity. A faint smile appeared on her face as she realized she was no longer afraid. Even with the audience of strangers, she felt a strange sense of comfort. The piano responded to her touch as if it recognized her, and the music that flowed from her hands seemed to fill not just the hall, but a small part of her heart that had longed for something extraordinary. Minutes passed, though it felt like seconds. The girl played without thinking about time, lost in the melody and the feeling of the notes under her fingers. Occasionally, she experimented with small variations, trying to add her own personality to the sound. She had no idea that these small touches made the performance even more captivating to those who watched quietly, marveling at the natural talent that seemed to appear without effort. Finally, she played the last few notes of the melody, holding them slightly longer before letting her fingers lift from the keys. The room fell into a soft silence, filled with the lingering resonance of the final notes. She opened her eyes fully and realized the artists were still standing there, waiting, silently acknowledging what they had just heard. Embarrassment and surprise mixed in her chest. She hadn't expected anyone to hear her at all, let alone react with such attention. She took a small step back, unsure how to handle the situation. Her hands trembled slightly, and she looked down at the keys as if they had done something magical all on their own. One of the artists cleared his throat gently, breaking the silence. "That was remarkable," he said softly, careful not to startle her. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The girl shook her head quickly, almost laughing nervously. I never learned," she admitted quietly. She felt vulnerable, as if she had been exposed in some important way. But at the same time, a small spark of pride grew inside her. She had created something beautiful from nothing, purely from curiosity and instinct. The artists exchanged glances, clearly impressed. One whispered to another, amazed that such talent could exist in someone so young and untaught. The girl felt a mixture of fear and excitement, unsure whether this would end with praise or scolding. But the adults remained calm, respectful, and genuinely interested in the music she had shared. Her mother arrived a few moments later, noticing the group gathered around the piano. She paused, confused and slightly anxious, ready to apologize if necessary. But she quickly realized that there was no anger on their faces. Instead, the expressions of the artists were filled with wonder and encouragement, as if they had just witnessed something rare and beautiful. The girl looked up at her mother and then back at the musicians. A new world seemed to open before her, one that she hadn't dared to imagine. She had touched the piano out of curiosity, and in doing so, she had captured the attention of people she had only admired from afar. She realized, in that moment, that her life might be about to change in ways she could not yet understand. For now, she simply took a deep breath and smiled, feeling the thrill of discovery and the gentle warmth of validation from the unexpected audience. The music she had created by accident had spoken louder than words, and she knew, deep inside, that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. The girl could hardly believe what she was seeing. The hall, which had seemed so empty and quiet just moments ago, was now filled with a small group of artists who had gathered at the doorway, quietly observing her. They didn't step forward immediately, giving her space, but their presence was unmistakable. Their eyes were fixed on her, filled with curiosity and admiration, and the girl froze in surprise. She hadn't meant for anyone to hear her play, and now, she felt the weight of being watched. Her fingers hovered over the keys, unsure whether to continue playing or retreat. She felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach, the kind that made her palms sweat. But at the same time, she felt something she had never felt before, a sense of recognition. Even though these people were strangers, even though they had never met her, she somehow felt that they understood the music that was coming from her hands. One of the senior artists, a man with gentle eyes and a kind smile, stepped slightly forward. He didn't speak, but the girl could feel his attention on her, his quiet encouragement. Another artist whispered softly to someone next to him, and the words, though not intended for her ears, made her heart skip a beat. They were speaking of the music, of the unusual natural talent that was unfolding before them. The girl couldn't believe it. She had never thought of herself as talented, and now here were professionals, genuinely impressed by her untrained playing. Slowly, she began to play again. This time, her fingers moved with a little more confidence, though her hands still shook slightly. She focused on the music itself, letting it flow through her rather than thinking about how it sounded to others. The melody grew richer, more expressive, and as she played, she felt a strange connection with the artists who were silently observing her. It was as if her music was speaking to them, and their silence was a way of listening, a way of understanding something that words could not capture. The hall was quiet except for the soft sound of the piano and the faint rustle of clothing as the audience shifted in their seats. The girl noticed their reactions now and then, their slight smiles, the way their eyes followed her fingers, and it made her heart beat faster. She wasn't performing for them, not really. She was sharing a piece of herself, and the fact that they seemed to appreciate it made her feel both nervous and exhilarated. Her mind drifted for a moment to the first time she had touched the piano, and she smiled at the memory. What had started as a simple curiosity had grown into something much bigger than she had imagined. Now, here she was, surrounded by people who not only heard her but seemed to feel the emotion behind the notes. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. The girl continued to play, experimenting with small variations in the melody. She added soft pauses here and there, letting certain notes linger longer than others, and she noticed that the artists reacted subtly to these changes. Their heads tilted slightly, their expressions softened, and it was clear that they were engaged, following her every move. She realized that her music had power, even though she had never thought of herself as someone who could create something meaningful. Time seemed to slow down. The girl lost track of minutes as she immersed herself in the music. Her nerves faded into the background, replaced by a growing sense of joy and freedom. Each note she played felt like a conversation, a connection not only with the piano but also with the audience that had come unexpectedly. She didn't need words. The music spoke for her. The senior artist finally stepped forward, a cautious smile on his face. "That was beautiful," he said softly, careful not to startle her. "You have a gift. Have you had lessons before?" The girl shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, I've never learned." The artist looked at her with genuine amazement, then exchanged a glance with his colleagues. They seemed to share an unspoken understanding, as if they were witnessing something rare. The girl felt a mix of pride and disbelief. She had never thought of herself as someone special, and yet these professionals were treating her as if she were extraordinary. One of the younger artists stepped closer, curiosity shining in her eyes. "You're playing with such feeling," she said softly. "How do you know what to play?" The girl shrugged, feeling self-conscious. I just feel it," she said. "I don't know how else to explain it." The artist smiled, nodding in agreement. They seemed to understand without needing further explanation. Music, they realized, wasn't always about lessons or practice. Sometimes it was about instinct, about emotion, about a natural connection that couldn't be taught. The girl felt a rush of warmth at their understanding. She had never received such attention for anything she did. School was full of lessons and tests where she often felt ordinary, unnoticed. Here, her music made her feel visible in the most wonderful way. She continued to play, letting the melody grow, exploring its possibilities. The artists watched silently, completely absorbed in the experience. Her mother arrived just then, wiping her hands on a rag and looking around the hall. She froze when she saw the group gathered near the piano. Her first instinct was to apologize, to explain that her daughter hadn't been allowed to play. But as she looked at the expressions on the artists' faces, she realized they weren't angry. They were smiling, intrigued, even impressed. The girl looked at her mother and smiled nervously, unsure what her reaction would be. Her mother knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "They're not upset. They're amazed." The girl felt a mix of relief and excitement. The fear she had felt moments ago melted away, replaced by a new sense of possibility. She played one last line of music, carefully chosen to end the melody softly. The hall fell silent, filled with the lingering resonance of the final notes. She looked up, meeting the eyes of the artists. Their admiration was clear, and the girl realized that she had done something remarkable without even intending to. One of the artists, the same senior musician who had spoken earlier, stepped closer again. "You have something special," he said gently. Something that can't be taught. Do you understand what you have? The girl shook her head, unsure how to respond. She felt overwhelmed by the weight of the words and the attention. I think I just like playing, she admitted. The artist smiled kindly. That's where it starts, he said. But it's more than that. You have a natural gift, a way of expressing yourself through music that very few people can do. The girl's mother listened quietly, a mixture of pride and astonishment on her face. She had always known her daughter was special in her own quiet way, but seeing her recognized by experienced artists was something entirely different. She didn't speak, only watched as her daughter experienced this moment of recognition and validation. The group remained for a few more minutes, discussing softly among themselves. The girl felt the atmosphere around her change. What had started as an accidental moment, a simple curiosity, had grown into a connection with others who valued and understood her music. She realized that she had crossed a threshold, moving from being unnoticed to being seen, not for grades or achievements, but for something that came from her heart. Finally, the artists began to leave, one by one, giving her quiet nods and gentle smiles. Each of their departures left a small echo of encouragement, a silent affirmation of what she had created. The girl felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, her fingers still tingling from the hours of playing. She looked at her mother, who finally spoke, her voice soft but full of pride. They weren't angry, her mother said, smiling gently. They were impressed. You played beautifully. The girl nodded, feeling a new sense of confidence settle inside her. She had faced her fear, shared her music, and been recognized for her gift. The hall, once just a place she visited quietly, had become a stage where her talent could shine, even if it had started by accident. She knew that the music she had created today would stay with her, and that the connection she had made with the artists might open doors she had never imagined. As she left the hall, hand in hand with her mother, she felt a sense of possibility stirring deep within her. The music had brought her to life in a way nothing else had, and she knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that could change her life forever. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness for the young girl. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the hall, about the way the artists had looked at her with admiration and curiosity. Every time she imagined their faces, she felt a warm flutter in her chest, a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had never imagined that something she did without planning could have such an impact. When she returned to the art center that afternoon, she felt a strange sense of anticipation. The hall was quiet, just as it had been before, and the piano stood waiting, its polished surface gleaming in the afternoon light. She approached it slowly, feeling a mixture of reverence and excitement. Her fingers hovered above the keys, remembering the melody she had played before, and she pressed down gently. The familiar sound filled the room, and she smiled softly, feeling a sense of comfort. This time, however, she was not alone. A few of the artists she had met the previous day had come to see her again, quietly observing from a distance. They did not speak at first, allowing her to play freely, and she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She was still nervous, but it was a different kind of nervousness, one mixed with possibility rather than fear. She began to play, experimenting with small variations, trying to add her own touch to the simple melody. Her fingers moved with a growing confidence, exploring the piano with an intuitive understanding that amazed even her. She didn't think about the notes or the theory. She simply let her hands follow the music that felt natural to her. Each note seemed to carry a piece of her heart, and the artists watched, captivated by the raw beauty of her talent. One of the senior artists stepped forward, a kind expression on his face. "Would you play another short tune for us?" he asked gently. "We would love to hear more of your music." The girl hesitated, unsure if she should. She had never performed for anyone before, and the idea of playing again in front of an audience, even the small, understanding one, made her stomach flutter. But then she looked at the piano, at the familiar keys beneath her fingers, and she felt a sense of courage. She took a deep breath and nodded. She played again, this time with more confidence. The melody flowed naturally, growing richer and more expressive with each note. She experimented with small changes, allowing herself to add tiny flourishes that felt right. The artists watched quietly, their eyes wide with amazement, clearly impressed by her intuitive sense of music. Every movement of her hands, every subtle variation in the melody, seemed to resonate with a depth that surprised even the most experienced musicians. As she played, the girl began to notice something she hadn't before. The artists were not just observing her. They were learning from her. Their eyes followed her hands, their heads tilted slightly as they took in the patterns she created. She felt a strange sense of connection with them, as if the music itself had built a bridge between her and these strangers who had become, in some small way, her audience, her teachers, and her supporters. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. She looked up, her heart pounding, unsure what reaction she would receive. Then the senior artist clapped softly, followed by a quiet murmur of appreciation from the others. Their expressions were filled with genuine admiration, and the girl felt a rush of pride and relief. She had shared a piece of herself, and it had been received with respect and encouragement. "Your talent is rare," the senior artist said gently. "You have a natural gift that is very unusual. Have you considered studying piano formally?" The girl shook her head, feeling a mixture of awe and disbelief. She had never imagined such a thing was possible. She had only played because it felt right, because the music inside her demanded expression. The idea that someone might want to teach her, to help her develop her talent, was almost overwhelming. Her mother, who had been quietly watching from the side, stepped closer, her eyes wide with amazement. She had always known her daughter was special in small ways, but seeing her recognized by professional artists was something entirely new. We don't have the means for lessons," she said softly, a hint of worry in her voice. The artist smiled kindly, shaking his head. "We can help with that," he said. "We want to guide her if she is willing. Your daughter has something extraordinary, and it would be a shame for it to go unnoticed." The girl felt her eyes widen. The offer was almost too much to comprehend. She had never thought that touching a piano out of curiosity could lead to such an opportunity. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from excitement and anticipation. The idea that she might learn, improve, and share her music in new ways was exhilarating. Over the next few weeks, the girl began training with the senior artist. The lessons were unlike anything she had imagined. They were not about strict rules or technical exercises alone. They were about understanding the music within her, exploring the piano's possibilities, and nurturing the natural talent that had always been inside her. Each session was filled with discovery, laughter, and the occasional struggle, but she loved every moment. Her mother watched with pride, supporting her daughter in every way she could. She saw how the girl's confidence grew with each lesson, how the piano became not just an instrument, but a part of her life. The small notes she had accidentally played that first day had blossomed into a path of learning, growth, and opportunity. The artists who had witnessed her initial performance continued to encourage her, attending informal sessions to guide and inspire her. They offered advice, shared stories of their own experiences, and treated her as an equal, not a child, in the world of music. The girl responded with dedication, absorbing every lesson and letting her own instincts guide her development. It was not an easy journey. There were moments of doubt, moments when she struggled with difficult pieces or felt overwhelmed by the expectations. But each time, she returned to the piano with renewed determination, driven by the memory of that first accidental melody and the sense of possibility it had opened for her. She learned to embrace mistakes as part of the process, understanding that even the wrong notes could lead to new discoveries. The day finally came when she was asked to perform a short piece at a small showcase within the arts center. Her heart raced as she approached the stage, her mother by her side, offering quiet encouragement. The familiar piano waited for her, its polished surface reflecting the soft lights of the hall. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. As she played, the audience listened in awe. The melody flowed naturally, full of feeling and expression. She added subtle variations, letting her intuition guide her, and the music seemed to fill the hall with warmth and light. The artists who had supported her watched proudly, their eyes shining with admiration. Her mother's smile radiated pride and love, and the girl felt a deep sense of fulfillment. When the final notes lingered in the air, the hall erupted in applause. The girl looked up, her heart swelling with joy. She had come so far from that first accidental touch of the piano, from the quiet curiosity that had led her to this moment. She realized that this was only the beginning, that her journey with music had the potential to change her life in ways she had never imagined. For the first time, she understood the power of following one's instincts, of listening to the inner voice that calls for expression. She had discovered a world that welcomed her, a world where her talent was recognized and nurtured, and she knew that her life would never be the same again. The girl's life began to change in small but meaningful ways after the showcase. She woke each morning with a quiet excitement, thinking about the music she would play that day and the lessons she would receive. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a place where she could express herself, a companion that understood her in a way no one else could. Each note she played carried a piece of her heart, and with every practice session, she felt herself growing more confident and capable. Her mother continued to support her in every way possible, attending her lessons when she could and helping her practice at home. She saw her daughter's dedication, her focus, and the joy that music brought her. She had always known that her child was special in subtle ways, but now it was evident to everyone who saw her play. The mother felt pride and relief, realizing that her daughter had found a path that could lead to opportunities beyond their small, everyday life. The art center became a second home to the girl. She spent hours exploring the piano, experimenting with new melodies, and practicing the techniques her teachers showed her. Each lesson was a new adventure, revealing possibilities she had never imagined. The instructors were patient and kind, guiding her without pressure, allowing her to discover her own musical voice. They encouraged her natural instincts and helped her refine them, creating a balance between raw talent and structured learning. Word of her talent began to spread quietly among the artists and staff. They would watch her play during breaks or after rehearsals, impressed by how someone so young, and with no formal training, could create music that was both touching and technically remarkable. Some offered small pieces of advice or shared personal stories, always emphasizing the importance of passion and dedication. The girl listened attentively, soaking in every lesson and letting the wisdom of experience guide her development. Over time, she began to perform in small recitals organized by the Art Center. Each performance was an opportunity to share her music, to feel the joy of connecting with an audience. She discovered that playing for others brought a new dimension to her music, a subtle understanding that her emotions could reach beyond herself and touch the hearts of others. The applause and smiles from the audience were gratifying, but the deeper satisfaction came from knowing she had communicated something genuine and personal through her music. There were challenges along the way, of course. Sometimes she struggled with complicated pieces, or she grew frustrated when she couldn't play something perfectly. But each obstacle became a lesson in patience, resilience, and perseverance. She learned that progress was not always immediate, that mistakes were not failures, but opportunities to improve. Each time she faced a difficulty and overcame it, she felt a quiet triumph, a confirmation of her growing abilities and her determination to succeed. One afternoon, the senior artist who had first noticed her talent approached her with an idea. He suggested that she participate in a regional youth music competition, not to win prizes, but to experience performing in a different environment and to meet other young musicians. The girl felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness at the suggestion. She had never thought about performing outside the familiar walls of the art center. The idea of a new stage, a new audience was intimidating, but also thrilling. With the encouragement of her teachers and her mother, she agreed to participate. The preparation became intense but rewarding. She practiced diligently, refining her technique, exploring new expressions, and learning to manage her performance nerves. The more she practiced, the more confident she became, discovering a depth of skill and understanding that had been hidden even from herself. She realized that her potential was far greater than she had imagined, and each day brought a new revelation about what she could achieve. The day of the competition arrived, and the girl felt a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. The venue was different, larger and filled with unfamiliar faces. But as she approached the piano, she took a deep breath and remembered the first time she had touched the keys. The simple curiosity that had led her to discover something extraordinary. She let that memory guide her, grounding her in the joy of playing rather than in fear of judgment. As she played, her music flowed naturally, carrying the same heartfelt emotion that had captivated the artists at the Arts Center. Each note resonated with authenticity, and the audience responded with attentive silence, followed by warm applause. The girl felt a deep satisfaction, realizing that her music had the power to communicate beyond words, to touch people she had never met. In that moment, she understood that her journey was not just about learning to play the piano. It was about discovering who she was, expressing her inner world, and connecting with others in a meaningful way. Her mother watched proudly from the audience, tears of joy in her eyes. She had always dreamed of her daughter finding something she loved and excelled at, and now she saw her child stepping confidently into a world filled with possibilities. The girl had grown from a quiet, curious child into a young musician with purpose, passion, and a sense of direction. In the weeks and months that followed, new opportunities arose. Teachers and mentors offered guidance on advanced techniques and performance strategies. Invitations to perform at local events came, allowing her to gain experience and confidence. Each new experience, each new audience, strengthened her skills and her understanding of music as a form of personal expression. The girl's relationship with the piano deepened. She no longer approached it simply as an instrument, but as a partner in her journey. She experimented with composition, creating her own melodies, exploring different styles, and learning to convey complex emotions through her music. Each new piece she created reflected her growth, her experiences, and her unique voice. Through all of this, her mother remained a steadfast source of support, attending performances, helping with practice, and celebrating every milestone. Their bond grew stronger, built on shared experiences, pride, and love. The mother had always known her daughter was special, but now she witnessed firsthand the impact of talent nurtured with care, dedication, and encouragement. The Arts Center continued to be a home for the girl's musical development. She became a familiar presence, respected and admired by the staff and visiting artists alike. Her story inspired others, showing that talent can flourish in unexpected places, and that opportunities can arise from curiosity, courage, and a willingness to explore the unknown. As she continued to grow and develop, the girl often thought back to the first time she had touched the piano, the accidental note that had begun it all. She realized that one small act of curiosity had opened doors she could never have imagined, leading her into a world where her abilities were recognized, nurtured, and celebrated. That moment, simple and unplanned, had set her on a path that would shape the course of her life forever. Through her journey, the girl learned that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, perseverance, and a willingness to embrace opportunities were equally important. She discovered the power of passion, the importance of guidance, and the joy of sharing her music with others. Each step of her journey reinforced her belief in herself and her abilities, giving her the courage to pursue new challenges and continue growing. By the end of the year, she had performed in multiple showcases, created her own compositions, and built relationships with mentors who believed in her potential. She had transformed from a quiet, curious child into a young musician with confidence, skill, and a sense of purpose. The journey that had begun with a single accidental touch of the piano had blossomed into a life filled with music, opportunity, and the promise of a bright future. The girl knew that the path ahead would continue to have challenges, moments of doubt, and hard work. But she also knew that the music within her, the curiosity that had led her to the piano, and the support of those who believed in her would guide her through. The door that had opened on that first day had led to a world of possibilities, and she was ready to step through it, one note at a time, discovering the extraordinary in every moment and sharing it with the world.